Breaking Par with Bernard Sheridan is brought to you by Impact Zone Golf Academy, located at Tiburon Golf Club at the Ritz-Carlton Golf Resort and Impact Zone Golf World Headquarters, both located in Naples, Florida. Welcome to Breaking Par with Bernard Sheridan, the only weekly golf instruction podcast that interviews the best golf industry pros from around the globe. Now, here's your host, Advanced Impact Zone Golf Instructor, Bernard Sheridan.
Mike, thanks so much for being with us today at Breaking Par.
It's great to talk to you.
So we were speaking off camera before we started, and I want to say that it was my pleasure to have the opportunity to see you speak at a proponent group. I want to say it was probably a seminar that was at the PGA show last January, and you touched base on ground force and kind of, I want to say probably more about like the way power is created and where weight transfer happens and things like that. So you are teaching that up at Penn State University on the main campus, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And what are the majority of the people who take your course? Are they in the PGA program, or are there some people who are not and just interested in this?
Yeah, we've got a couple options. I'll give you a little bit of background on our center setup, and it'll help clarify that. So, my faculty appointment is in the Department of Kinesiology, which most people think of as exercise science. My counterpart in our PGM program is Eric Hanley, and we have a golf teaching and research center that's it was started by the PGM program, so it's housed under them, but it's a collaborative effort between both departments now. So most of my golf instruction work is through the PGM program. So I'll join in for sections of their courses that apply to human movement, kinematic specifics. The PGA program doesn't have much at all on kinetics yet. So anytime topics like that come up, I get to join them. And then we've put together. We haven't done it full time yet, but we've actually developed a course for the kine students to take. That would be sort of an introduction to biomechanics of golf. So we've got the instructor-specific side through his program, and then the exercise science-specific version coming for the students in my department. Okay.
So, and what type of technology are you using up there? What are you using gears? Or are you using something that's like that? Or are you using? Is it your own system? Let us in a little bit on that.
We're in a great position. We have a few options. So we early on we had the choice when we were getting the lab set up of going with one of the existing software analysis packages. Primarily at that point it was AMM or GBD, Rob Neal stuff.
Sure.
We elected actually to work with an independent optical camera company, Qualisys. They're very similar to Natural Point, which is the camera manufacturer that has produced the Gears software. So we worked with Qualisys to develop our own golf analysis package. It started as a kinematics, as a motion analysis only. A year or so later, we added a pair of 3D force plates, so we've added a kinetics or ground reaction force analysis package as well. So we've developed it. It's available through Qualisys for folks that have their own optical system. In some ways, visually, it looks like Gears. Our body analysis is a lot more involved. It's on that side. It's more like what AMM has been or GBD is. That it's a full 3D 6 degree of freedom motion analysis for the whole body.
Nice. And now is this all markerless, or is it wireless, or is it? Or in other words, you're cabling them up when they're doing this stuff.
Yeah. So for that hardware, we use the little reflective markers that everybody's seen for EA Sports commercials and stuff like that.
Sure.
So our camera system is basically a dedicated indoor system. We actually bought an 8-sensor magnet system as well to take outside. We've used AMM software. We primarily use GBD now. We've done a fair amount with Rob Neal. He's been great to work with. So we actually have, I don't know if a lot of folks have this, we have the option of doing optical indoors or going out on the back of the range and taking a magnet system with us.
Nice. Okay, so now I got a ton of questions to ask because there's a lot of different things that I'm sure, information that you've gathered that you, and I'm sure that you're probably using all different types of people to gather that information, correct?
Yeah, we've had one of the very nice things for us is we've got a great population of students in the PGM program. So we've got 125 kids floating around at almost any time that are good golfers. And one thing but we have a good older population in State College. It's not just a college town; it's actually a pretty good retirement town too, which for us is great. But we will not just focus on PGM students. We've had visiting mini tour folks, so we can compare and some high-level players. We obviously have a Division I team, men's and women's here. But we'll look at 15 to 20 handicap folks. We'll look at 50, 55, 60 and over, so that we can take a look at kinematic trends or movement trends between age groups and playing abilities.
Is there a big difference in age groups when it comes to what's going on in their swing? Let's just take one topic. Weight shift. Downswing weight shift into impact to finish. Do we see a big difference across the board in age groups in that? And how much more, let's say, a younger age group might transfer weight to front foot as opposed to an older? Or and is there a big difference in handicap levels too?
Yeah, that something as broad as weight shift. Where we'll really see differences is playing ability. There are some general trends that if you want to have a driver speed of 105 or above, there are some limitations on what you can do for weight shift. But even some of the kind of classic kinematic or movement stuff that people have heard about, we're taking a look back through some kinematic data, and we've got ours. We ran about 1,500, 2,000 driver swings through and did sort of a large database analysis, and then came back and compared to some of the existing data that's out there, published data, AMM or GBD system data. And I'm assuming most folks are relatively familiar with kinematic sequence information. And so we're taking a look at speed contributions through the body. And basically the difference for us is that this group, club head speed was about the same, but we were comparing largely an 18 to 24-year-old group compared to a group that is 30 to 50. So again, the club head speed average was actually quite close, but what we saw is pretty quickly we started seeing differences a little bit in linear motion, a little bit more in relative rotational speed. Our kids, and this may be there may be a few reasons for this. One, it may be just a general trend as we're seeing a shift toward what some folks would call a little bit more of the modern swing or the Rory hips that people talk about. But our younger population tends to have faster hips, a little bit faster torso as far as rotation, but they don't have as big an increase between arm speed and club speed. Whereas the older population actually does a little slower hips, a little slower torso speed, but they actually do a better job of sort of releasing the club or getting a speed gain between the arm and the club. So it could be a little bit on physical ability at that time. Maybe that the older golfers have actually developed a better ability to get to release the club more efficiently, so they can gain more speed with a little less body speed.
Okay. So in other words, fast twitch muscles for older players, you found, are a little bit more efficient in gaining in the aid to gain speed, as opposed to with younger players. Then we're looking at more of torso is really what the driver of the speed seems to be more. And just because of experience, or because of, what do you think of methods of the way this swing is taught now? I know that a lot more instructors try to get the torso more active in being able to gain speed. Also, I think the reason why for that, at least in my experience, is that I try to quiet the hands, because it's easier for a player to consistently come back to the same spot at impact, get a little bit more solid contact, as opposed to getting the hands a little bit more involved to create more speed and release. That's more of a timing issue. And so you think do you feel that that's an effect as to why that's happening with younger players now, just because of the way they're being instructed, or the way that they find should be happening?
Well, I think there's definitely an acquired skill of being able to get good club release speed, so get a good speed gain from what the arms are doing to the club. And I think, again, it would take a while to go back and work through this, but I think experienced players are better able to do that. And because of that, they don't have to create as much pelvis speed, torso speed to get to the same club speed. Younger players, they're young, full of energy. You mentioned fast twitch fibers. We haven't done muscle fiber testing yet, so
okay.
I can't comment on that. Although by the age of 50, it's pretty clear in general population, fast twitch fibers go away earlier. We tend to hold on to slow twitch fibers. But once we get to an over 50 crowd, then we'd be talking about, what really is the maximum body speed that can be created, and do they even have the choice of creating more body speed, or do they really need to just be good, very efficient at creating club speed relative to the body speed they're creating?
Okay. Now, as for that speed, have you found any difference in more or less speed being created more through rotationals or verticals?
Okay. So for this, I'll switch to more of a kinetic assessment.
Okay.
So using ground force. And one thing we see really clearly is we can put together an overall torque or sort of rotational energy measure for horizontal plane, and I'd say frontal plane. A lot of folks would call it vertical, and that's okay.
Okay.
And across the board, if you're everybody we've seen, they're within 55, 45 either way. Some folks are a little bit better at using a frontal plane, which is more of the vertical force. Mm-hmm. Some people are a little bit more at using horizontal, but we haven't found the player yet that can be like 60, 65% frontal, vertical only, and doesn't do a good job with horizontal. We've seen folks that have that kind of pattern. They're really dominant in one plane, but we haven't found one with good club head speed yet. So bottom line right now, it's very strong evidence that you have to have good both. You can't make up for one without the other.
Yeah, so both of those things have to be happening relatively, and you were saying 55-45 either way. So in other words, some might be more 55 rotational, 45 frontal, or as you said, frontal. I call it vertical. Some people call it vertical. I just call it vertical because I'm thinking of up. So is there, in the studies that you've done, an optimal point in the downswing where that frontal kicks in and really begins. So in other words,
Oh yeah.
so I know that I've spoke with a couple of other instructors who've kind of looked at that and have found certain points in the downswing kind of match when vertical starts. What have you found in that research?
Yeah, it's before the downswing. That though the forces have to be in place before. Now so people define downswing a little bit differently. We define it as when the club starts turning. Some folks in kinematics will define it as when the pelvis starts turning, which, well, in every good golfer, the pelvis should go earlier. So that force pattern, it starts. That's what actually slows the backswing a little bit. But in everybody's creating good club speed, at least for a driver. Before the club has started on its way down, they have already really started creating the force pattern that's going to put in speed, and they max it out almost always right around when lead arm is parallel. So it's actually relatively early in the downswing. The other thing we see is there are some folks that will max it out then and maintain it from there. But one thing we've seen is you can't make up for not having it early by having it late. So if you haven't done a good job by arm parallel and you're still trying to put energy in when the club is getting close to the ball, that's too late to turn ground force into club speed.
Sure. So that's really a great tip there for our listeners in Par Nation, is to understand that that jump up. I'm kind of quoting Brian Manzella there, but that jump up wants to be at max by the time the lead arm is parallel to the ground on the downswing.
It depends a little bit on what you mean by a jump up. So, what I typically tell people is that the forces show intent. If you want to jump up, then you create a bigger up arrow, bigger vertical force. So, sure. So the time of the peak force, everybody remembers F equals ma. That'll be the time of the peak acceleration. The peak velocity, when somebody looks like they're moving up the fastest, that'll actually happen later. So the peak force will happen lead arm parallel. The pelvis rise, that jump up that people see, that's going to continue later in the swing.
Sure.
But yeah, it's got to be set up early, and then you get to see it a little bit later.
Sure, because I know that when we see players who hit it really far, we do see and depends on the player. I mean, we can go with all different players, mm-hmm. but some we see a lowering of the pelvis on the mm-hmm. way up, and then we see on the way back down, we start to see a rise of the pelvis coming into impact until it rises fully to a finish. So I think that what I'm trying to let our listeners understand is that because I think that a lot of listeners, at least the ones that I deal with, they have a tendency to try to believe that they have to keep that pelvic down because it's going to affect their posture, and so they're so busy trying to stay in their posture that they don't allow some of that stuff that's going to create ground force and power to happen naturally.
Yep.
But what we're saying here is that it has to happen if you want to gain maximum club head speed. Mm-hmm. And depending upon, let's say, the type of player will depend upon when their pelvic release happens due to rotationals and verticals together. So I mean, I see a lot of different type players who do that. Now, do you find that? And we spoke about. You said that you're using weight plates now too. Do you find that when that happens, is there a specific point where that ground force is being applied. Is it more on the player's front foot? Is it more on their back foot? Is it more on in between? Is it split? Is it? I mean, that's something that I think a lot of the listeners out there would like to understand.
Yeah. Usually I have some visuals that I put up for this. So
if you have something to do, you can do that, and then we'll see it on video. Our listeners who listen to it on iTunes won't be able to see it, but they'll be able to go to the video if you have something that you could that you would want to use. If not, that's fine too.
Okay. I'll try to go without and keep it simple. So from the frontal plane view, so face on camera view.
Yes.
To create again what I'd call a frontal plane rotation or frontal plane moment, what most people talk about is using vertical force well. You want as much vertical force on the left or lead side for a right-handed golfer. Jumping up with your left leg only would be good. I'm not saying we should actually do that. Using your right leg to drive straight up actually doesn't help. So that's why that weight shift, and I mean the actual weight shift, getting your pelvis over, getting your torso, at least the lower part of your torso over a little bit, that allows us to push up with the left or lead side well, staying back in the swing, especially later in downswing. What that means is to stay balanced and stay upright, we have to push up more with the right foot. And that actually sucks power out. So pushing up with the right doesn't help much. Well, actually, anytime after transition, we're trying to use enough of that to maintain balance. So as a general guideline, we want left side vertical force very early in the downswing. So that's for creating frontal plane or vertical type rotation. For the horizontal plane, we want both. Both can contribute really well. The right leg, what we can basically do is try to drive the right side of the pelvis forward. Conversely, and again, this is for a right-handed golfer, the left foot is not just driving straight up and down. So we talk about the vertical all the time, but that vertical force is actually tilted back. So the golfer is pushing up, but also pushing back. And what that does at the same time is it helps create that frontal plane rotation, but it also helps create that horizontal plane rotation. So they're not mutually exclusive. Good golfers combine them very well. Whether they're thinking about it is different, but they can work together really well.
So in other words, if we had, let's say, 2 arrows on the player's feet, mm-hmm. and the more force we had, the taller the arrow would get. And I'm kind of going by what I saw you do as a little bit of a presentation. You also showed in that presentation, and I have some video of that. I'll try to attach that to this.
Okay.
So that we can, at least when we're talking about this, we can just see a little in picture as to that video and to show what we're talking about. But so in that ground force that's happening on that left foot, that arrow would not be moving directly straight up, correct? It would be moving up, but it would also be moving slightly towards the player or towards the target.
It would be going away from the ball.
Okay.
So yeah, and actually, what happens at early transition, it's oriented almost straight away from the ball, and then as the upper body starts rotating toward the target, it shifts from pointing away from the ball to pointing away from the target. The analogy I use from an overhead view. For Americans, it's the tire iron. You've got a handle on each side, and you want to put one hand on one side and push that way. You want to put your other hand on the other, and that's the way you're trying to push. And when it's straight across, my right hand's pushing straight up, my left hand's pushing straight down. But once it gets to here, now I'm turning this way, and here I'm pushing that way. The overhead view of ground reaction forces looks almost exactly like that. If you look down at the pelvis, as the pelvis turns, you can see the arrows turn with it.
It's interesting. It's very interesting. And so, as in a translation of a player trying to create more ground force in a feeling, what would you say they would want to try to feel? And I know that for us to pigeonhole every player into one specific feeling is incorrect. But just as a general guideline for those players out there who are just trying to get a little bit more pop out of the ball, and if I would say, okay, I want you to feel like you're standing up on your left leg as you're pushing forward with your right, or I mean, that's just an example. I'm not saying that that's what they should do.
Right.
But what would you suggest as a feeling that a player should feel to create a little bit more pop?
So in our lab, it would depend on what we see in the pattern, how we'd cue what we're going with. But yeah, as a basic version, we want to get them to actually before the downswing starts, get a little bit of pelvis slide to the lead side so that they can push vertically with a lead leg. Then the next step is we want them not just pushing vertically, but we actually want to have them feel like they're pushing up and back a little bit with the lead side.
Okay.
And pushing with the right leg, they're pushing a little bit sideways, but also basically trying to push the right hip forward. So that's the basic combination we're talking about. So up and back with the left, across and forward a little bit with the right or trail side.
Now, have you found, or and here's a question that's still on topic, but a little bit different. And have you found that that slight vertical, or I don't want to say vertical, that slight horizontal slide of the left hip towards the target on the downswing is essentially has to happen before the player starts to rotate. So in other words, let's get those joints lined up, hip over ankle before rotational starts and rising starts. Is that would we be correct in assuming that, or would we find that, of course, there's variations in all different players, but I know that most players have a tendency when they think of, and here's the reason why I'm touching base on this, when they think of what should happen kinetically in the start of the downswing, they feel like they should start with their hips first. Sometimes what I find is when players do that, they either have too much of a slide towards the target and they now get kind of out of sync with themselves, with their upper and lower body, or they're trying to right away raise their hips immediately, as opposed to feeling like if they can just kind of stack all that stuff up and then go. So I think that I found that there's a lot of them don't get there soon enough, or they get there too fast.
Yeah, and both are options. So most players, and I'll talk about pelvis here. Most players do shift away from the target a little bit in the backswing, but we definitely. What we don't want is the shift to time, so that the backswing they're shifting away, and then in the downswing they're shifting toward the target. If they're waiting that long to shift toward the target, it's too late. They're gonna lose some power. And this is full swing. Partial swings, things are a little bit different.
Sure, of course.
So yeah, by lead arm parallel in the backswing, the slide away should be done realistically. And by top of backswing, we like to see people at least already going toward the target. And so what we typically see is a trade. Late in backswing, they definitely start the slide. It'll continue through through the top of the swing and a little bit into early downswing. But what basically happens is we see that the slide starts to drop off as the pelvis turn picks up. So one of the teaching cues that I think Rob Neal uses a lot is that you bump and then turn, and the bump starts in the backswing.
I know that if we look at this in relationship to other sports, and I know that there's not a lot of other sports where there's actually a backswing and a through swing. Well, there is hockey, tennis, but as a throwing motion, let's say, which is similar, if we look at a throwing motion of a pitcher, there's that weight shift, but then as the pitcher gets right just about to the top, he's already starting to move towards the target before his arm even begins to move, and he's starting to clear his hips, and then his hips are tremendously cleared as he leans forward, correct? Yes?
Basically, yeah.
So a lot of that kind of is happening in the golf swing, too, if it's being efficient and if the energy is at that weight transfer and efficiency is happening at the correct sequence.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good analogy, actually.
So, and I think that a lot of players out there, they don't really look at it that way, and they because if you think about when a pitcher throws a pitch, there's not a lot of, and it might be because he's on one leg at the top. There's not a lot of sliding of his hips, or he's not intentionally trying to slide his hips towards the target. He's just kind of turning towards the target, and that happens in a natural progression. There is, of course, some sliding of his hips that happen, but he's not thinking about that. He's just moving towards the target.
Okay. Yeah. Different. I'm sure that the different folks have different cues and understanding of their own feeling and how much they feel they're sliding versus how much they actually are. But yeah. What you talked about before, the slide first, clear the hips, and then really let the rotation happen as a general guideline is a great way to go.
And those hips are clearing, like you said, as the player is already on his way to the top. He's already starting to clear before he even reaches the top of his backswing. At least all the better players, that's what they're doing.
Yeah, and they've at least started. Most of them, we'll see folks that at the top of the backswing, they're typically even to maybe even an inch toward the target compared to where they started. Although it depends. There's some folks with a little bit more side tilt at the beginning. There's some folks that are a little bit more up and down. So, but having the pelvis at least back to kind of 50-50 between the feet by the top is important, and continuing to go toward the target already by then is really important.
Now, do you find that the stiller that they can keep their pelvis at, or at least feel like they're staying a little bit still? Because you said you don't want to have too much of a weight transfer, or what I usually try to do is get players to keep their pelvis a little bit more square to the target, moving to the top, as opposed to a lot of rotationals going on the way to the top. Do you find that most of those players are doing that?
Do you mean linear or do you mean a rotation?
I mean rotation. So in other words, I do see that higher handicappers have a tendency to rotate their hips on the backswing more than lower handicappers. But that does not mean that they can't do that. I mean, a good example is Davis Love just won at the Wyndham, and he has a tremendous amount of hip rotation on his backswing. He shifts all the way to his right side, but of course he's a very experienced player and has had many years to work on that move, and it's worked. And apparently it's working pretty well for him right now because he beat the whole field that's a lot younger than him. And I guess maybe because he is in the 50-something like myself, that helps him. He might have not have done that as much as when he was younger. But it could be because of just overall his size and just his body structure. That's what works best for him.
Yeah. Yeah, a big question. So we see folks that are pretty successful, just like you said. We see folks that are successful with a little more and a little less hip turn or pelvis turn for us. The question really is, why are they doing it?
Right.
If they're trying to create speed from there because they don't know how to use the ground well, and so they're just trying to kind of whip and spin and
Right.
to start and hope for the best. Yeah, that's never going to be all that effective. If you have, we'll go back to what we were talking about. If you've got a decent use of vertical force, but you want to be a little more sort of rotation dominant, yeah, then you can do a good job with a little more turn in the back, and we see a lot of good players that still have that. So it's definitely not a fatal flaw. The question is, why is someone doing it? If you can develop a good pattern that way, but when that's a compensation for a lack of something else, then, which I think you see a lot in the 15, 20, 25 handicap and up, that's where it's not going to be an effective move.
Well, I know that for me personally, if I keep my hips a little bit more quiet on the backswing, I can create more ground force. I feel more ground force. I feel more torque happening for me. I'm kind of a half and half player. I'm kind of like half rotational and half frontal. Probably a little bit, probably like 55-45, 55 rotational, 45 frontal.
Okay.
Whereas I see some other players who are more frontal, the opposite direction, where they're really have a lot of jump up going on like that. But I know that if I have more of a rotation with my backswing with my hips, I don't gain as much rotation or as much. It's almost feels like I have further to go.
Yeah. It's having a big turn away, and still being able to get back to your lead side and use left side vertical force well. It's a pretty dynamic move. You've got to have good timing, good skill to do it. So it definitely can be done. I think a lot of folks will, like you said, if they have a medium turn, then they can control that pretty well. They can do a good job of getting a little bit of a shift going toward the target, and they'll create a better. They'll have more consistent success creating good downswing with that.
So if we were to make a suggestion to some of the players out there who seem to make a big turn, to experiment maybe on making a little bit smaller turn, in other words, quieting that just a little bit, and then testing that and seeing what the result is for them. And if they do get a little bit more pop or a little bit more ground force out of that, or if they feel like they have more power, usually I know that if a player feels like they have more power, a lot of times they do have more power. And that's just because it's just that pure feeling that you feel in your core and pushing off the ground that makes you feel that way. At least it does for me. So, but I might be pigeonholing that, but I think that most of those the players who are having a lot more hip turn, they're just not feeling that. So maybe if we get them to quiet that up just a little bit, and I'm not saying make any drastic changes, but if you make little changes and experiment and then just test it, I think a lot of people don't do that. But now I'm sure that when the people that you're seeing, they're a little bit more understanding through education of yourself, as to knowing that those things have to happen, as opposed to not doing it or not seeing those things. But most of the better players kind of do it by themselves anyway. Yes.
Well, hopefully by the time they leave us, they understand better, without a doubt. We see a mix. We get some folks that pay. I mean, before they walk in the door, they pay a fair amount of attention. They think through and focus on making some smaller or sometimes bigger, but they determine the swing change they want to make. There are other folks that come in there, they have a general idea, but they really go on sort of a natural feel and what feels good to them, what they feel has worked, and they can be right on as far as what they think is happening, what it actually is. But we get some folks that are pretty surprised even by what they're doing compared to what they thought they were doing.
Sure. Now, for our listeners out there who would be interested in finding out more about either taking your class at Penn State or maybe visiting and finding out some information, how would they go about that? What's the best way for them to do that?
Oh, yeah. So for the last few years, it's fun to have visiting instructors come in. It's fun to have visits from golfers that are interested in this side of things. So we've once a month or so, we can usually schedule half to 3/4 of a day and get one or a couple folks in and do a combination of some swing assessment or some education type stuff, depending on if they're interested in their own swing or teaching others. So we definitely have that, and if folks are interested in that, I can give you I think you have most of my contact information, but I'll pass that along.
Okay.
The other thing that we made a hard push for this summer is we're developing an online education course. It's not for college credit. It's a take the course. And it's an introduction to both sides of 3D. It's the kinematic side, so the motion analysis side. It's a shorter introduction to ground forces, but the real emphasis is it's definitely not on developing the single perfect swing. It provides some decent ranges, but one of our real goals is to help folks understand how the different components of 3D can be used for instruction, whether it's a visual tool, whether it's an interactive feedback tool, or for assessment. So I think our first course will run October 15th. It'll be all online, so folks can do it from wherever they want to take it.
Wonderful. That's fantastic. So I know there's a lot of instructors who listen to our show too who will be very interested in that. And if they're not, I would be seriously surprised. I know that I am. And the more that I can learn from gentlemen like yourself who are studying this kind of stuff full time, it's really just awesome to find out about this information and to be able to apply it and use it in the world of golf. So it's some great stuff. It's great work that you're doing, and I really appreciate it.
Thanks. I don't know if I want to pause for a second. So we talked about some force stuff, and I don't know if I can share a screen with you or give you a couple visuals. Do you have an option for that?
I'm not sure. I've never tried to share a screen on Skype,
Okay.
But we could try it.
Let me. Well, I'll play around with this for a second, and here we go. More of a moment arm. Also, as far as what you're going to want the left leg to do going through the rest of the swing into impact. So you want a small and sideways right side push, and you want to maximize that left side basically. So and their system gets vertical only. So what you want is nearly vertical. You don't want this pushing back too much because again, as that angle's too far back, this would be probably this point of swing. You get somebody angles it too far back, then you're actually going to shut that down. So left side vertical, right side horizontal, those are really the two keys in the first half of downswing to creating that peak moment. So I'll take him, and you can see that left side arrow starts shooting way up. And usually right around here, so right around lead arm parallel is when most people have the peak torque they're developing.
Yeah, so what we're seeing now is we're not seeing the video move. So
Okay.
so we're seeing for some reason. So it's kind of like I see the video. I see it says visual 3D educational.
Okay.
And I see the skeletal, and I see the player at the top, and I see the blue arrows.
Okay.
But then as you begin to move it, it doesn't look like it's showing us. So maybe what you could do is continue to talk about this
Okay.
and do it anyway, and then you can send it to me, and then I can incorporate that into part of this video so that we can see it. I'll match it up with what you're talking about.
Okay. Yeah, I'll just realistically, I just want to show you probably two still pictures, and what folks will see right away is, even though from the front that left side arrow looks like it's going up, if you swing around to the back, you can see he is actually pushing not just up, but he's a little bit pushing away from the target, and he's definitely pushing back with his left side. So I can send you a couple. If nothing else, I can send you a couple still images to throw in there.
Sure, that'd be great. That'd be great. That's awesome. That's awesome
actually,
stuff.
Let me see if this will. Actually, I'll put that back on for a second. All right. What do you see of his right now?
I see a frozen picture of you down the bottom, and then I see it looks like it's reloading.
All right.
And now I see. There you go. Now you're back to just a little bit of a gap, and there's a little bit of frozen stuff going on. But
okay. Well, I'll stop screwing up the transmission here and send a couple stills your way.
Yeah, that's okay. And then I said before, I shot some video at that proponent group summit that shows some of the same stuff. So I can probably incorporate that in there, or if you want to maybe send me a video through email or something like that, or then that would be good too.
Okay.
Great. Well, Mike, thanks for taking the time. I really appreciate you being here. There's a lot of great knowledge, and we'll post up there on the page when the show is released. And usually the show, it takes about 8 weeks for it to be released, because I have so many that are already kind of in line. But
that's good.
But no, it's great, and it makes it easier for me if I'm really busy, tied up, and I have to. Like I can't do a show 1 week, then I'm still releasing shows every single week, and that's the idea, is to show up every week so that people can get more information, and it helps grow the game of golf.
Yeah. Well, it's fun for me. It's been a lot of fun seeing growing instructor interest in the kinesiology side, and all components. I mean, obviously, I like the biomechanics side. But the psychology, the physiology, so it's fun to see more of that, an interest in more of that from the instructors, and understanding of how they can work pieces of it into their sort of instructional philosophy.
Yeah, I think that the going trend, at least now, and it's always been this way for me, but I think that the growing trend with a lot of instructors now is just to get as much knowledge as they possibly can, and from every single source that is possible out there, and find guys like you who are willing to share that knowledge with us in the industry is so well welcomed, and we're so grateful for every bit of it.
Well, great. Yeah. So you're I'll put you on the spot here. You're Philadelphia area, aren't you?
I am in Philadelphia. I will be here until the end of September, and then I am actually relocating to the Naples area.
Oh, really?
Down in Florida, yes. So I'm fortunate enough to be able to work with Bobby Clampett, and he welcomed me to work with him right now on a freelance basis, but a lot more often than not, since I'll be close by to him. In that area, and then hopefully it'll grow to more where I'll be working with him almost full time in Impact Zone Golf. I'm an advanced Impact Zone instructor, and I really enjoy a lot of that method of teaching, because it touches base on a lot of the things that have to happen in the golf swing, not on a swing style in particular. and he's an extremely passionate person about the game, like myself. And I mean, for me, my whole life revolves around the service of helping others understand more about golf. That's why I have this show, and helping them simplify the game as much as possible, but also gather as much knowledge about it as possible, so that that knowledge is understood and it can be simplified, as opposed to it being kind of some people feel very confused by it, and some even feel threatened by it. I never feel threatened by technology or knowledge. I always embrace it and try to do the best that I can to help others understand it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the things we've noticed as folks have gotten here is they now the folks that come up, obviously they're motivated to get here, but what happens a lot is they start to see, especially experienced instructors, most of them have been successful for a while, so they get to see the concepts we're talking about, how they fit into what they've been teaching already.
Yeah.
And so what we see more of is maybe they understand the exercise science side of it a little bit better, but they pick up a couple small usable components that they can add into what they've already been doing, or make relatively small changes.
Sure.
And I think as long as we present, and it's easier for us because I work with instructors all the time. So if we can present within a golf context, especially, I have the advantage of having folks that have been instructors for their careers, whether they were teaching full-time or part-time, and then working on a PGM program. So that makes my job of communicating a lot easier. So, and that helps me when folks come up. It helps me understand what they've been teaching, what they've been trying to get out of it, and what's been successful for them.
Yeah, and it's probably a validation of some of the things that they've been doing, and when you show them, it kind of validates that they were correct, or maybe not, or maybe didn't understand things a certain way, and now they do. So it's some great stuff. I know that a close buddy of mine who's close to here has been up there many times, or I'm sure more than once. That's John Dunnigan.
Yeah.
And he's very interested in all this, and he is another one of those guys, kind of like career teachers, who's the type of guys that you're talking about, who come up there and check all this stuff out. It's some great stuff, and I wish that I could come up there. Unfortunately, I'm in process of this transition now.
Yeah.
But whenever I have that opportunity, and I'm sure I will, I would love to come up and see the whole operation and everything that you do, and continue to pick your brain even more.
That would be great. Yeah. Yeah, I was wondering if, you're going to be, I think, busy for the next month. So sometime after you move and settle in, you can schedule a visit back up to your home ground and come visit us.
That sounds great. Great. Well, Mike, thanks a lot. We're kind of running out of time, but thanks so much for being with us and taking the time. And I don't know how much you play yourself, but what we always like to say here in parting is try your best to keep it in the short grass until we meet again.
Well, thank you very much.
All right, take care.
All right.
Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Breaking Par with Bernard Sheridan, the only weekly golf instructional podcast that helps you take control of your game. Need help with a part of your game? Email us at parbreakers@gmail.com and we will cover your topic in a future show. You can also follow us on Twitter @parbreakers. For more tips and videos to help your game, go to www.parbreakers.com, where you learn to take control of your game.